Welcome to the You Are Worth It podcast. I'm here with Ashley Barnes today, and we're going to be discussing a difficult subject in the traumas that we suffer as a child, and sometimes they affect how we act as adults and with our children. And Ashley, it's nice to have you with us today.
It's good to be here.
Yes, ma'am. What would you like to accomplish by being on our podcast?
I've thought a lot about my testimony and just that testimonies aren't taboo topics. They're in the past, yes, but they're definitely something of how we are today. And it's helped shape and mold us as human beings. And my hope and prayer is that somebody can relate in one way or another to my story, but to also just get people to understand that it's okay to talk about. Yes, it was in the past, but it's not something we need to shy away from or be scared to talk about because, leave it in the past, don't talk about it. It's not taboo. It's not something that we have to tiptoe around. It already happened. We can't change it. So why not talk about it and share, we're still alive today for a reason. And that is to share our testimony, and that is to hopefully shed light on some topics that people are scared to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the enemy. The enemy uses fear to keep people from sharing their testimony, or self doubt or shame or anger, or guilt, whatever he can do to keep people from sharing their testimonies, because that's the secret. I mean, in chapter 12 of Revelations, that was the secret power that God used to defeat the warring angels, the devil, Satan. And they used the power of the blood of the Lamb and the words of their testimony of the goodness of God to defeat them. So thank you for being willing to share your testimony. I believe you have a powerful testimony, and it's a pleasure to help you share it today.
I appreciate it.
Hopefully, we can help some people to overcome some issues of their past.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start out in your childhood. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a half brother and a regular brother. My half brother's about 15 years younger than me, so half my age. And then my brother right below me is about 2.5 years younger than me. So I'm the only girl and I'm the oldest.
And what did your family situation look like growing up? Like, did you have both parents home, or
Yeah, I definitely grew
how did,
up kind of split. When I was little, I was born and raised in California, and so my dad was in the Navy, and so that was kind of bouncing schools every other year. I was at a different school, but when I was born and raised in California, and then I moved here when I was about 6 to 9 months old, and so my brother was born here. All of my dad's side are originally from here, Louisiana, and then my mom's side are all from California. So my brother ended up being born here, and then when I was about 6 years old, almost like in between Christmas time, we moved back to California. um, and so that's when my mom and dad officially separated, and they didn't get divorced until I was 16. And so I look just like my mom. My brother looks just like my dad. So that dynamic of when I was at my dad's, it was a lot of anger because I looked just like my mom and he hated my mom. And then when we were back home, it was all of my mom's side of the family was kind of ugly towards me and my brother, but just it was very split, it was ugly, and it was, the whole divorce and with kids, we're stuck in the middle of something that we didn't ask to be stuck in, and, we didn't ask to be in that situation, and so yet we got pulled into it, and being minors, from when I was 6 to 16, you're that 10-year, age gap group of just being pulled. Do you wanna be with your mom? Do you wanna be with your dad? Well, why do you not wanna be with one and the other? And so it was just a constant flip-flopping all the time, a bunch of trips here, back to California. My brother's more on the quiet side, so he just kind of just sucked it up and dealt with it, and then me, on the other hand, I was very vocal, and I had to pretty much grow up quickly and kind of I don't know, just grow up quickly is pretty much the main thing. Is I've had to make decisions that I didn't think I would make at, 10, 11, 12 years old, and when my mom sat me down right before my 16th birthday, she was like, "Okay, dad and I are officially getting a divorce. How do you feel?" And I was like, "Well, one, I knew it was coming because it had been, well, tell your dad this," and then my dad would say, "Well, tell your mom this." And so being stuck in that, it was just, I didn't want to hear it anymore. I was ready for them to be done and over with it. And my brother didn't care, but I had to pretty much kind of be a mom and grow up quick to my brother, and it just kind of became us from then on. But it definitely was a lot of toxic, and so that was my view of marriage. Very distorted, very, not faith based, and just kind of you just if you don't like it or, a situation with your spouse, or if you don't, if you feel your spouse is doing something, instead of communicating, you screamed and yelled and then you departed. You would move states or you would, move somewhere. And so my view of marriage was very, very distorted and very toxic. So that led into all my relationships of dating was toxic and just I didn't know what that foundation looked like. I just yeah, it was very, very distorted.
Having stability as a kid really, I think, is a major factor in how you end up in life, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily it doesn't have to be, but I mean, percentages show, you know? So, did you experience any trauma as a kid?
Did.
Physical,
Yeah, I
emotional,
did,
sexual?
yeah, not sexual. Well, it was, my mom had remarried and then my dad had remarried kind of in that time frame. Um, well, shortly after that, and so it was a lot of physical from my mom, and then on my dad's side, when I was here, his wife at the time she would, drink a lot, and so they would cause things from her, and she wasn't very much older than me. Maybe about 7 or 8 years, and so she was trying to play mom and didn't need to be, but then she was trying to be my friend, so it was a lot of anger towards her and they're not married anymore, haven't been for a while, but it was a lot of, like, just sexual how do I put it? Like, just derogatory comments from my stepdad at the time, just asking me questions of things, when I'm 15, 16 years old, some things you from another man, stepping into that father figure role don't need to be asking, a daughter or a stepdaughter, and he had had a daughter also as well, and so it was just I felt gross, having that come from him, but then I also felt not really worth anything being physical and verbally abused for 10 years because it started right after I turned 6 years old and we moved back to California till the time I was 16. So during the whole 10 years, I was not only being me and my brother back and forth between my mom and my dad's in different states, so you got totally different cultures, totally different, way of doing things, way of parenting was different. My mom and dad's side are totally different type of people. And so I would get it from, my dad and his wife when they would drink here, and then it would go back to my mom's side, and I would get kind of the same thing from them. And I just felt gross and I felt misplaced. Like I didn't feel like I really belonged with my mom and them, but then I didn't feel like I really belonged with my dad. I just kind of was like a misfit, kind of, and felt like the black sheep. My brother was calm, cool, collective. He was, so he kind of knew where he was at in life. And I just, and then that too, I felt like that kind of stemmed more to me than my brother because I was more vocal and because I was like, why are you doing this? What is going on? I didn't make my bed, so you're going to what me? Like, I'm so confused, So I was more vocal about it, and I think that's what fueled the anger, and so then as a teenager, preteen teenager, it got to where I didn't just take it. I kind of fought back a little bit, which also kinda made things worse, and, I did a lot of different, activities in school, and there was a lot that I couldn't do because different parts of my body were shown with, either bruises or with different things, and I would have comments from teachers here when I lived here or, spent time the summer here, I would do summer school, and so a lot of the teachers would ask where different things while they were on my body, and I would just be like, "Oh, I tripped and fell," "Clumsy me, silly me," and it was just I didn't really wanna talk about it because I was kind of scared and nervous that, it would get back to certain people, and but there again, it was like, no, I felt something inside that I was like, "But this isn't right." Like, why is it why do I feel hated from my mom, hated from my dad? They never really said that, but, you know, actions can speak louder than words sometimes, and I just felt just misplaced and that I was just this just trash bag just sitting on the side of the road waiting for someone to just go on and just take me out, And during that time, there was multiple
So,
times where I was just like, what's the point? Definitely suicide attempts that obviously didn't work. But the last time that I kind of was just done was right after I turned 16. My birthday's in December, so it was right around Christmas time, which of course the holidays, it's supposed to be happy. Everybody's supposed to be close in a family. And I'm over here
yeah.
just like, who cares? I don't even care anymore. Like, if I make it to the next year, great. If not, who's going to care at that point? And it was right at that time that I met my husband. And so, full circle with that, I used to, live here for the short amount of time right after I was born. My mother in law now was my preschool teacher when I was here until I was about 6 years old. So, I've known her and them my entire life. So it was a God sent, and I didn't know it then, but it was a God sent that God was using me in the situation that I was in, just sitting there creating chapters in my book before I could even realize that's what he was doing until I met my husband. And it was literally we were FaceTiming because, almost 12 years ago, 13 years ago, that was kinda all we had was Skype, and so we had just gotten computers for Christmas, and so I was able to FaceTime him, and right before I was FaceTiming him, I had a shoelace around my neck and I had a knife to my wrists, and so I literally got on FaceTime and I took the hair tie off and I'm just holding this knife underneath the camera. Well, ironic enough, my mother-in-law now, she comes in, kind of pops her head in and was like, "Hey," waved at me while I was FaceTiming my husband, boyfriend at the time, and she was just like, "Hi, I'm so
And
and
how old
so."
were you?
I was just turned 16. Yeah, my
Wow.
birthday was at the beginning of December, so I just turned 16. I was still living in California before I officially moved here and just FaceTiming him. And my mother-in-law popped her head in, and then he was like, "Well, let me go to the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back. You talk to my mom for a second." I was like, "Okay." She sits down and she's literally like, "Hey, I don't know what's going on. You have a look about you." And she said, "I just want to tell you if you want to pursue anything with my son," and he's the oldest, he has a younger brother. He said, "If you want to pursue anything with my son, you have to get yourself together. Like, you have to get your stuff together." She's like, "I know you, I know your family because I've known you your whole life, but," she's like, "you have to get it together. You have to do something." Because I do not want that to linger in because their family's a good family, together home, mom and dad still together. They just have a good family, Christian family, grew up in the faith, and I was the complete opposite. And she was like,
Let's back up a
yeah.
little bit. What happened at 6 years old that started the abuse that was the catalyst?
Yeah, so we moved from here, Louisiana, back to California in the middle of, like, Christmas time, and so that was right after I turned 6, and so when we moved back, my dad didn't know because my dad was working out of town a lot, and he didn't know my mom had taken my brother and I back to California, and so she had either sent him a letter or sent him something saying like, "Hey, we're back in California, like, we're not coming back home, you and I are done," all the things. Well, it was a lot of my dad personally, he was feeding a lot of stuff to me and my brother of like, "Hey, your mom just, like, kidnapped you up and left," so it was a lot of negative from him, and because he didn't know what was going on. Well, then my mom, she did a lot of things, you know, in her time during that time of, like, just alcohol and stuff, and which is another thing that kinda led me into a lot of that part. Um so it was a lot of alcohol, going out with friends, but then she wouldn't get home until late, and so that's why I said I had to grow up fairly quickly because it was just me and my brother living at my grandparents', and it was
Yeah.
I didn't do something right, I didn't make my bed, I didn't but now realizing a lot of it did stem from her divorce and with my dad and the cheating, both sides were cheating on each other, but they both hated each other, and so the kids were the only middle ground that they could get back at the other parent by you know, doing something to the offspring that they had together. That was what I had gotten the gist of that, years later. But
What about her parents? Were they abusive?
her dad was
Were
to her
they
mom. Yeah. Yeah, her dad was to her mom in front of them and in private.
and was your dad abusive to your mom?
I never saw anything. It was a lot of yelling and fighting and throwing things if they were ever, like, in front of me and my brother. They were, more yelling and fighting and screaming, and throwing things. My mom would throw anything that she could find at him or vice versa. But my dad and my brother are very similar. He's either gonna lash out or he's gonna be completely quiet and just kind of leave the situation. And that definitely fueled my mom more because she and I are very similar where, "No, let me tell you how I feel. Let me, express how I feel." And sometimes it just was more harm than good, instead of to back up from a situation, it was, "No, I'm gonna throw something at you to hurt you," to get my point across, and that's what we saw more was that kind of physical stuff.
So whenever she would get angry, he would leave, and then she would take it out on you?
My brother, since he was more on the quiet side, he didn't, say anything, I guess, I was one that would more bark back. Like, "You're not gonna hit me, you're not gonna," so that on me, that was my part of rebelling and being like, "Well, you're not really gonna do it." I was one of those kids as well, so I know I made that worse. Um, and so I was very kinda had the smart mouth a little bit, but it was just I really didn't think that she was angry. at my dad, I really thought she was angry at me when she would, spanking would lead into, well, you know, if you don't move your hands, I'm just going to hit wherever, and so spankings lead into, more harm than good when it comes to discipline. And so that definitely alters the way that I think as, a parent, because I am a mom of two boys who are older now.
Like, how bad are we talking with the I don't wanna I mean, I don't wanna make you just relive it all over, but I wanna get across what you've been through.
I think the hardest part of that is she would have a belt and she would jingle the end of it, and we would be in our bedrooms down the hall, and me and my brother would, we had bunk beds, so we shared a room a lot when we lived here. And, I just remember her jingling the belt, and you would hear that down the hall. So anytime, and she used to have, like, the big, like, cowboy buckle type belts, she used to wear those all the time. And so it just, if you heard that, you knew somebody did something, whether it was your fault or not, you're the one that's gonna get, in trouble. If you didn't make your bed, she was a very strict, tough nut, parent, and we didn't say, "Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am," that wasn't a thing that we did in our household. And so if it was you said anything, rolled your eye, like, just any possible thing that you can think of, it was you heard the belt jingle down the hall, and it was almost like a horror movie, where you just, like, you hear the tension of the music coming. And so that, to me, even to this day, it's if my husband takes his belt off a certain way and I hear it, or, like, something I hear it, someone walking with a chain on their pants or their cup or something, it definitely, like, a double take look just a little bit. Even though I'm way older now, it's still something that I'm, like, learning to, like, breathe a little bit and not have to hold my breath and just wait for the door to swing open, or just kind of, I don't know. It just that's the one thing that really still gets to me. Um, and so, like, my husband doesn't wear belts that have anything like that on it, just out of respect. And so that it definitely was a big trauma thing for me to hear that belt jingle, and she would do that on purpose and just kind of start laughing when she went down the hallway. 'Cause she's like, "Oh, you're gonna get it. You're gonna get it." And a lot of times it was,
And
I
it
didn't make my bed, or I didn't, take out the trash when I was asked to. And, but, when you're told to do 30 different things and, alcohol is involved, their concept of time and all that's altered and different. And I never felt like I could please her. I never felt like, I just felt like I just couldn't do anything right. I couldn't, get good grades. If I didn't have an A or a B, then when I got home, I was screwed. I was in trouble. And so I would hide my grades all the time. I would just I would forge her signature because my dad worked out a lot out of town. So it was just her at the house with me and my brother. And so I would forge her signature a lot because I was just terrified. I was like, please don't call home. Like, I'm good. Like, she's already signed it. She's already looked at it. I don't need you to call home. Or if I got in trouble at school or something, I was just terrified for them to call home for her to come up there, because I knew I was gonna get it double time. I knew I was gonna get in trouble at school, get in trouble at home, and my brother was just the complete opposite. So it all just was at me all the time. And then I'm trying to suck it up in return to look at my brother and be like, "We're good. It's okay. Like, sister's good," and try to put a face on, and, then go to school the next day with, bruises on my back because I didn't move my hands and she missed, or, on my hips. And so then that led into, well, she just fell. She was playing with her brother and she just fell, and or she fell off the trampoline. We didn't have a trampoline. Like, it was just things like that, but we never had, like, CPS called, because it was always excused. It was always, well, she does dance and, all the things. And I'm just like, okay, these people must be naive or dumb or something. And she would tell the counselor the same thing, she's a clumsy, clumsy little girl. And then we moved back to California, and that just kind of got worse.
are we talking like, it got worse, like pulling hair? Like, was there emotional abuse also?
There was, and that led into my stepmom. She was very much, I have, a condition to where it's really hard to have kids, and so I'm very blessed with the 2 that I have. And so I was diagnosed at 16, and so my stepmom would at the time would always say, like, "You have this condition for a reason. Like, I knew you were never gonna have kids. Like, obviously, this is something that you are never gonna have." And I have a huge passion for kids. I was a teacher for years. And so a lot of that stemmed from her, and then it would lead into my mom saying, "Well, maybe you don't need kids." And then it would be back and forth between when I lived there and when I lived here of, "Well, you don't deserve kids. Like, just look at you. Look at you. You don't deserve kids. Your body's going to reject it anyways. It's nothing that you can heal from. There's nothing that you can, you'll never be good enough to have babies or kids. You definitely don't deserve kids by the way that your parents are. From my stepmom to my mom, she's like, well, look at the way your mom's treating you. What makes you feel like you need to have kids to what, rewrite history? Or, so it was a lot of that just agony, like just constant poking, and there was so many pokes
Yeah.
until I finally just was
Of
like, done.
not being not being comfortable anywhere you
Yeah.
go, pretty much.
Kind of watching how I said and how I did things. So I was constantly on edge.
And did that lead you into any type of substance abuse or anything like that?
Yeah. So my dad was an alcoholic really bad. He was in the Navy, so that was just a comfort thing for him. Like he always drank. And so my mom was the same way, but she also kind of did a lot of prescriptions and it was I don't want to say a hypochondriac, but there was always just kind of something wrong. So she had a lot of different medications. My grandmother did too. So it was a lot of that in the house. And I saw how it made her and made other people in my family, like, feel, and I thought, "Oh, okay, well, if I can't end my life and it's not working, I'm gonna go ahead and try at least this, so at least, I won't feel it," kind of a thing. And so that's when I started doing a bunch of different prescription pills, like painkillers. Then alcohol was one of my biggest things because my mom and, all of them were like, "Well, as long as you do it at the house or as long as you know, yeah, mostly it was, if you do it at the house, it's fine no matter what you drink, how you drink. And I'm obviously between 12 and 15 years old, sitting there drinking and smoking in my bedroom, with the window cracked. Eh, I
Though
never
she was
thought,
strict, that's funny to me because she was so strict about other things, but she
but it
would
was
allow you
something
to drink.
similar. Yeah, if it was something that she was doing, like it was fine as long as it was at the house because she can, in a sense, she controlled that. I wasn't out partying and drinking like she was. This was what it was able for her to control. My brother never did any of that. He was a very calm, good kid, but I was so over being pulled back and forth, and that was the only thing, you know, doing harmful things to myself didn't work at the time. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just do this. I was like, I see everyone else getting passed out drunk. If it happens to me and I don't wake up, cool, whatever. I just didn't care. And it was anything I could find in the house. It started out with, just bottles of wine that I would drink by myself, and then led into harder liquor. And then I would start mixing liquor with prescriptions, which obviously is like the worst on top of, still cutting and burning myself, and so that was lack of blood loss and then dehydration because I'm not eating and drinking water like I should, and so that would end me up in the hospital all the time because of just not being myself at all.
So cutting and burning yourself, you just kinda dropped that in there. Yeah, I don't even
I
that you felt that bad about you.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you think did it feel like that would did it alleviate the pain that was inside of you, or
It
what
numbed
did
it.
that accomplish?
Yeah. To me, it numbed it because the alcohol muffled my hearing, so it drowned out the noise. And then prescription painkillers and cutting and burning myself on my wrists and my kneecaps. I don't know why I did my kneecaps, but I did my kneecaps and my wrists. I would burn my kneecaps and use a knife on my wrist, a pocket knife. But the alcohol very muffled my hearing, literally, physically. But it also just mentally blocked out all the constant stuff that was in my head. That from my stepmom and from my mom constantly saying these things, and my dad too. But I feel like the prescription and all that just I felt like trash, so why not trash my body, you know? If I feel this certain way and they feel that I'm a certain way, why don't I just, like, prove them right? I mean, they're gonna be right either way, in my head. Why don't I just go on and just do what they're saying I am? I don't think that I am this way, but if they are saying it and there's multiple people saying it, it must be true in my head. So I just wanted to drown out the noise. It muffled my hearing. I was able to just, like, sit in the silence. The spankings, whippings, all that didn't hurt as much at the time because I couldn't feel a lot of different things. If it was a belt or if it was, a thick, long paddle, if it was a switch, if it was, like the thick leather belts, that have the little studs all down them. No matter what it was, I didn't feel it at the time, but obviously I would feel it the next day, and I just felt worse the next day, but then it just was a cycle, then it's the whole cycle of the abuse all back over again, so then you numb it, you muffle it, you don't have to worry about it, and then you go about the next day because it's a new day, maybe it's gonna be different, and then it wasn't, and so I got conditioned to that all day, every day. Uh, and so I just for years.
How did the idea of cutting yourself or burning yourself even come about?
I did it a
And
lot
how old
during
were you whenever
um probably 14, 13, 14, because it was a couple years towards the end, because that was a lot of the last stuff that I did. The shoelaces I would tie around my neck all the time when I was a couple years younger than that, just for well, it's lack of oxygen, so then it, messes with your brain, and then, it's almost like a high. It started out kind of like a high, um, for the lack of oxygen and stuff, and then I would, like loosen it or cut it right at the very end, and so I was like, "Okay," then my head would start spinning, and then I just would do it all over again, but then I started doing zip ties years later, and so that and when that didn't work, because it tightens, obviously, like a zip tie, it only tightens so much, and then you have to cut it to release it. The few times that I did that, my brother would walk in on me, like, in my bedroom, because I would lock my door, and he was the only one that had little fingers to, like, pick the lock or whatever. He would come in, and I would have my pocket knife doing what I would do, and just I would have to cut it real quick, because I did not want him, because being a sister/mom to him, I did not want him to see me like that, to see that it affected me mentally. And that I was doing that because, during the fall, winter time, you wear long sleeves, you can't tell. Turtlenecks, you can't really tell. But in the spring and summertime, I would kind of wear similar clothes, and I would get people telling me, why are you wearing that in the summertime? Like, aren't you hot? And I was like, I would rather be sweating than you see what's going on. And so I'd be dripping sweat in the summertime wearing a turtleneck, or a long sleeve with a scarf on. But right around the time when the zip tie thing didn't work and I panicked because I thought my brother was coming in and I was trying to cut it and it wouldn't cut, so I started panicking. Well, when you panic, to me, everything started swelling in my neck or whatever because I was getting nervous. And then when I finally clipped it, that's when my husband at the time, boyfriend, he was FaceTiming me because he had said he wanted to FaceTime at a certain time because of the time difference. And that's when he started FaceTiming me. And I tell him and people even to this day, like, you literally, like, the Lord sent you. Like, right when we started talking and dating at that time, we hadn't even officially started dating yet, that he literally sent you at the most defined point in my life where that should have caused me to pass out because my mom wasn't home at the time, and I thought my brother was walking in, but he wasn't. I cannot express to people when, like, God timely does things, that's a wake up call. That should be something that you look at and take a step back and say, okay, something is wrong. Because, like, I don't know, it hit at the perfect time. And when Pastor Christopher, our pastor, talks about the nick of time all the time, when Pastor talks about, he shows up in the nick of time. And I wasn't really a good, strong believer hardly at all at the time. But when I had moved here, I was still kind of drinking and doing the drugs, the things that I shouldn't be doing. I started going to church here, and I would show up to church and just act like everything's okay. And because leaving there to come here, leaving all of that I just was dealing with, I was old enough to move in with my dad. I still didn't, talk with my mom. I was just like, I'm out. I just want to get far away from you. I want to get far away from this situation. I moved in with my dad. He was still working out of town a lot, so he really wasn't there. And so my husband and I quickly got married because I was like, I just need to start over, start fresh. I need to get out of this situation. And I was still doing some of the things that I was doing.
how old were you whenever y'all got married?
19. I moved here when I was 18.
19. So you got married, and how did y'all meet?
Facebook. I was friends with a lot of the same friends because I used to live here. And so my preschool, early childhood age group friends were now, 16, 17, 18 years old. And I had gotten my Facebook for the first time when I got my computer when we first started FaceTiming. And I started adding different people on Facebook, and I noticed him and I was like, gosh, your family looks so familiar. And so I started adding each one, just getting excited or whatever. And he popped up, and so I added him, we got to talking, and then it dawned on me, I was like, "Your mom has been my preschool teacher when I was little," so it was like a weird full circle, and that was when a few weeks later, we had FaceTime for the first time, and she had popped in, and she was like, "I don't know what is going on," she's like, "But I've known you since you were little, and you look different. Like, I don't know what's going on, but you look different," which, I mean, not only was I depleted physically, but mentally, I was just over it. I had just tried to commit suicide, like, not long before that, and she was like, "But you gotta get it."
So On these suicide attempts, would you be the only one? I mean, would you be the only one to know about them, or
As far as I
did
knew, yeah, I was in my bedroom, in my closet.
I'm so sorry. I'm
Looking
so sorry
back,
you
I
went through
wish I
that.
would have spoke to somebody because we had a guidance counselor at school. We had, all the opportunities, but I didn't pick my friends wisely, and so a lot of the friends that I had, I couldn't talk to like that, and they were pretty much doing substance abuse anyway, so it wasn't something that I could be like, "Hey, what we're doing is wrong. I'm struggling with this." And I couldn't really talk to many
Yeah.
family members, and I just was like, "Keep your mouth shut before you get in trouble again like you've done, like you've had before. So this is just another thing to keep your mouth shut on." And I kept my mouth quiet for a long time, and then, of course, I felt just not worth anything because of how trashed my past was and how, leading up to that point of how, no one could love me because I'm just a bag of trash, and I've gone through all these different things between my mom and my dad and my stepdad and stepmom, so there's no way I could possibly get married. I've already been told, you can't really have kids, and if you do, you're gonna miscarry or stillborn because of how my body is. Oh, I just so many negative things, and then all of a sudden, my husband just shows up out of nowhere, and this is, I was 16 when we started talking, just after 16 years old, and just out of nowhere, and of course, I'm not big at the time believing in God. I knew there was something higher, but it was just something that I was like, "I could do that later. I don't have time right now. I'm too stressed." I don't have time for religion, not realizing it's not religion, is just a friendship. It's a father-daughter a relationship that we have with God. I felt so out of place in the world, and I felt so disconnected from everything and from everybody, and I didn't feel like I had anybody really to talk to. And so I would just sit in my room, and to me, I would talk to myself. Obviously, God was listening the whole time, talking to me. I just was so muffled ears and so, just trying to numb everything that I didn't want to listen. I didn't care to listen. So if he was talking to me, I didn't know. I didn't care to, and I couldn't talk to family, couldn't talk to friends, and I never wanted it to get out, that part of my testimony, until recently, just because I just felt like there were so many people involved in the negative, bad struggle of that time period of 10 years. It's a whole decade of childhood that, I can't get back, and I don't have that childhood, left. Like I just it's in the past, yes, but all I can do is move forward from that point. And so being a mom, it's just all those I guess PTSD, which if you want to call it that, and trauma, things popping back in my head when I do discipline my own children. It's a lot of that comes back even to this day. And I'm 31, and it comes back full force sometimes, and I'm just like, Lord, you gotta step in and get me out because I can't do this by myself, and I felt for so many years that I was by myself, and I know that's so cliche to say that a lot of people say that they feel alone and God's, like, right there, but I truly felt so by myself that I felt so isolated that I couldn't talk to anybody, and if I did try to talk to anybody, I was either gonna get beat at home or I don't know, I just was so scared, and I know I shouldn't have been, but as a child, I didn't felt like I have a voice, and I didn't feel like I was old enough to have a voice, and what I did say didn't matter because who's gonna believe a child, and even though I had marks, I had bruises, I had cuts, I had, burn marks or cigarette burn marks too, but who's gonna believe me? Yes, I have marks, but who's really gonna believe me when certain people in my family have said, "Oh, well, she's tripping and falling, or she's just clumsy." So I'm like, "Okay, well, who's gonna believe me? I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut," and never said anything, and yeah.
Have you caught yourself doing the same behaviors that your mom did
Yeah,
with your own kids?
when my oldest, because 'cause I've got 2 boys, they're 8 and 10, so when my oldest turned 6, it was so crazy. It was right after his birthday. They're April and May, so right after April, um, it was he had done something or rolled his eyes or something, and I literally just snapped, and I grabbed him, and I didn't shake him, but I just grabbed him and I got in his face, and I just said some things to him that no parent should ever want to, say to a child, and it was the same thing that I was saying that my mom was saying to me that I said to him, and it was the same age. So it was kind of a weird bad full circle that I was like, "Oh, he's at the age where that I was as a kid, and I don't ever wanna talk to him ever like that ever again." I was just telling, "What is wrong with you?" And that used to be a big thing that I would say all the time, "What is wrong with you? Why can't you do this right? Why ca" and I was saying everything that my mom said to me, and it flew out of my mouth, but in my head, her voice saying it to me was continuing to come out at the same time, so it was almost like she was speaking through to me, like through me to him, and I just had to stop, and I just lost it crying because I don't know, I just told him, I was like, "I'm so sorry. I need to just give me a minute. I cannot touch you right now. I know that sounds weird. You're a child, because at the time they were 6 and 4. I said, but this is when it started for me as a kid. I said, I just need to back up a little bit. And so a lot of the disciplinary things that we do as parents, as husband and wife, my husband kind of deals with that more. The older they get, discipline does change a little bit because of just the things that they do are different. Not everything needs to be disciplined a certain way. And then kids being opposite, just discipline's different, and so my husband kind of takes the role of that a little bit more with them being boys and then men and one day head of their households. He wants to make sure that they truly understand what a father figure, what a husband looks like because he had that, I didn't. And so I am still in the process over the last couple of years really learning what it's like or what it should be like to be not only a daughter, but daughter in real life because I had to pretty much be a mom very quickly to my brother, and then later my half brother. But to also be a mom and a wife and what that looks like and retraining my brain, but also kind of rewriting not my story, but just rewriting the narrative that was told over me as and as a young girl and that's still hard. It's still, even as a wife, my husband is very calm, cool, collective. You're able to have a conversation with him and talk things out and but not growing up that way, seeing your parents throw things at each other and scream and, swinging, that kind of stuff and just screaming. I was doing that, at the beginning of our marriage. So it was really tough the first couple years of marriage of just relearning because, coming out of that, dating for a short amount period of time, it was probably almost 2 years when we dated and then we got married. So we never really, and it was long distance dating. So it wasn't really, we were here to really know each other. And kind of what our lives were going to look like. And so when we got married, I was bringing that trauma into our marriage unknowingly. We would have a disagreement, and I was pregnant with during our first year of marriage, and so I was not only having my hormones all over the place, but I wanted to up and leave. And so after we had our first, things just got worse. And so that also just leads into another part of my testimony of we got into a really bad argument, my husband and I pulled what my mother did and up and left, and I took our 1.5-year-old at the time, and I was like, "Come on, like, let's go," and so I went to another one of his family members' house that I trusted and just broke down to her, and I was like, "I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm literally doing repeating history, like, something's gotta give, but I don't know any better, no one's taught me how to be a mom and a wife, like, I don't know what I'm doing." So postpartum was really bad, for me as well because I didn't know how to handle being in that position as a mom and as a wife. And I was just doing the same things that my mom was doing to me that I was doing, to my husband she was doing to my dad. And so I left for a couple of days. And when I came back, I had enough found out that I was pregnant. And, so my husband and I not only were starting to kind of get back together, but we were pregnant with our second. And the main fight that we had that made me leave was the same exact fight that my mom and dad had when she took my brother and I back to California when I was 6. She wanted more kids, my dad did not. I wanted another child, my husband did not. So we at the time, and so we had a big head-on collision, and I said, "Then why did you marry me?" And so he was like, "I don't know." And so I up and left, and when I came back, I was like, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant or having another one." And it was a big shock, but that was a wake-up call to both of us, for my husband realizing, like, it's gonna happen, and then for me, it was, "Oh, no, I'm having another child. What if it's a girl?" Because our first one, I knew it was a boy from early on, but it really hit me at that point of, "Oh, no, if it's a girl, I don't I want girls, but I'm not fit to have a girl because I did not want history to repeat itself even more so and to get angry and what if she looks like me and, because I look just like my mom." And It was really tough, but when I had the second one and it was a boy, that's when my mom started to come around. She lives in Colorado, but she would come to visit with our second, and so she got to kinda know both of the kids a little bit and kind of refix things with me. Granted, it's still almost 10 years later, and we're still working on things, but it's working on it at a distance, I feel like has really helped me mentally because I'm a very outspoken verbal person and I feel like God's using that distance for a reason. And I know that since I have my own family now, I do have to, think of my own family, but it's still hard to have certain conversations with her, about being a mom and having kids. She has a certain way of doing things. And we've had butt heads a lot of, okay, well, that was your thing that you did in the past. Like, let me be a mom to my children. Let me work this out. I don't need to repeat history. And so we've done counseling
Yeah.
before. We've done a little bit of counseling before with just her and I, and I feel like that's helped to get like a second party, that's not involved, that doesn't know us personally, but it's still there's stipulations between me and her with the kids because I don't want as a grandparent, I don't want things to happen all over again just because she's the grandparent now. She's supposed to be the fun grandparent. She could do whatever and it's not going to bother me. So she's limited, times that she spends with them for, her like if she's visiting here, it's the time is kind of limited and but she is great with them. So it's weird. I'll be honest, it's really weird to see that relationship, to see that dynamic with her and our boys. But it's also bittersweet because I know that I can't get that back. But to see her with my children, it's a whole nother light that I'm looking at, a whole nother magnifying glass that I'm looking at, that it's not just, the physical, verbal, anger growing up, that she is a totally different person. And yet it's still cautious, like I'm still very cautious of, you know, how
Yeah.
much she spends time with them, the situations that she's in. If they start acting up, she backs away and looks at me to say, okay, I'm not their mom. You do what you need to do discipline wise. And so it's a process. It still is a learning curve, and I still tend to kind of snap at her like, "Well, you were supposed to be a mom then, and now you're a better grandma than you were a mom." So that bitterness a little bit still kinda comes out, and that's something that I'm still working on, knowing that she will always be my mom. She gave me life and that I'll never have another one. And I've had friends recently where their moms pass away and some are my age, some are older, but it hits me a little different the older I get, and especially around the holidays when, yes, as bad as it was to like it in John 5, chapter 5, where it talks about Jesus walks up to the paralyzed man and he's like, take up your mat and go. And that's something huge that I was frustrated about that verse when I was, a couple years ago because I didn't really understand. I was like, why would you tell him to pick up something that made him literally bedbound? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you tell him to take that up and go? Like, you want to leave it in the past. And so I thought that of my testimony. And so that part of my testimony, just leave it in the past. It doesn't exist. No one's got to know about it. Just erase it, stop it, start a new chapter. But here over the last 6 months to a year, I've more dug into that verse. And Pastor Christopher has talked a lot about that verse too on the pulpit of he says it for a reason, like, he pretty much as a humbling thing of you don't ever need to forget where you came from. That is your testimony. Your mat is a huge chapter, if not the entire past of your book, and it's something that you need to not only be reminded of, but other people see that when you're walking around with your mat, with your testimony, with, God's face shining upon you. Like when people see that, yes, it's gonna hit different. People are gonna be like, something's different about you. Like, why? Like what have you done or what's gone on? And then when you do open up and express, hey, well, this is my mat, this is my book. It's all mangled up and messed up and the pages are half torn and I don't really want to talk about it. But if it's gonna save a life or if it's going to help somebody in that situation right then and there, like if another person, even my age, is going through spousal abuse, I did not go through that, but that abuse is still the same. It's just the authority's different. And for me, being a child under that, to help someone else who has been quiet for so many years is scared to speak up because it's a taboo topic. No one wants to talk about child abuse. No one wants to talk about substance abuse. No one wants to talk about sexual impurity or drugs and alcohol and cutting yourself. Like That's very taboo in this time, day and age. That's been my biggest thing is that verse in, John chapter 5, verse 11, where it's like, "Take up your mat and go." Well, your chapters in your book, you can't just rip them out. He wrote them for a reason. You went through that for a reason. It is in the past, but that's something that's going to help you finish your story. That's something that you can tell people and show people, look, I should not be here. I should not have a husband. I should not be alive, period. But I should not have a husband who loves and adores me and my family and have children I should never have had and they came naturally. I should not be the mom that I am today. I should be in jail because I should have hurt my kids, but I didn't because God stepped in. And the fact that I do have that history of abuse or verbal, physical, mental abuse, substance abuse, I do have that, but it's not tied to me and it's not going to be tied to my children or my husband. So that does give me the fire to start talking about it with people and get people to realize that it's not something to like not talk about. I know you may be ashamed of that, but it already happened. You can't change it. So why hide from that? It is built in you, and God's going to use it for a reason, but it's not something to shy away from. And that's that up until recently, that's really kind of been like a tug at my heart is to really just share my testimony and especially of that part in particular because it is such a hush hush type of conversation nowadays that nobody wants to talk about. And now I don't see why people don't talk about their testimonies because we were created to share your testimony and create disciples. And in order to create disciples, you have to share what God's done for you. That's the whole point of why you're created. And, not seeing that as a
Yeah.
kid, but seeing that now as an adult, it's retrained my brain to the way I think of myself, to the way I see myself, to the way I, see my husband, not the way that my mom saw my dad, the way I see my children, that they're not burdens, that they're not bags of trash waiting to be just discarded. Like the blessing.
Yeah. After you guys got married, you were still drinking and doing things. How did you come to Christ?
When my kids found liquor bottles in the fridge, to be honest, my kids started to get a little older and I couldn't really hide it. And my kids are very smart, but especially my oldest, God sent him completely on point, perfect timing that he had saw it and he was like, "What's this?" And I told him what it was. And I was very open and honest. I said, "This is what this is."
We're done. We're almost done.
Yeah, I'll see you in a minute. Um, and so he had asked me what it was, and I told him, I was like, "Well, this is alcohol." And he's like, "I thought it was grape juice." And I was like, "No, like it's adult stuff. You don't need to know about it, worry about it." And he did. He took a sip of it because he just didn't know what it was. And he's like, "Mama, this is gross. Like, why do you drink this?" And sure enough, it was around the time he was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 maybe. And it just hit me and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like what am I doing?" I'm still doing what I told myself I've got to stop doing. And so I did not fully surrender until then. And it was like the help of my husband too, because he was like, you need to go to church. You need to really get help, not that I wasn't cutting and burning or anything like that. I was, not using prescription medication, but I was still smoking. I was still, drinking. And I thought, okay, well, that's not as bad. Like at least I stopped this. I can still do this and kind of get away with it. And so I was manipulating myself to think that that still was okay when sin is sin. And I really, I wasn't reading the Bible. I was going to church on Sundays, but not on Wednesdays. And I wasn't really paying attention because I was high from the day before or, having a hangover. So I wasn't paying attention and I started looking bad and my husband was like, this has got to stop. Like, I cannot live like this. He said, my mom said from day one, you've got to get your stuff together because this will linger and this will go on to your kids. And, so he's sitting there preaching to me and, and I was like, fine, whatever, I'll get help. But if it doesn't work, I'm just always going to be like this. And so that's when I started doing counseling with my mom. And that's when because I didn't want to do counseling with my mom. I was there for myself. And so when they had asked me, well, when did you start doing this in the first place? Like, when did you like, what was the very beginning of the drinking? And I told him the situation with, my parents and with my mom. And he was like, okay, the next session, whenever your mom's in town, and she was coming in town about a month later, therapist was like, or the counselor was like, I want to just bring her in just to have conversation. And I'm like, great, opening up a wound that I had tried to bury for so long. And sure enough, her and I go, and she knew the situations that happened, but she didn't realize I felt the way that I did. And it was a whole come to Jesus meeting at a halt. Like, you can't move forward until you address what has had you bedbound for so many years, and once you address that, just like Jesus did to the guy on the mat, he had to address the situation. Well, why don't you want to be healed? Why aren't you, just laying here? He had to address the situation before the man could move forward. And that's how it was for me and my mom. I knew it was about her. I didn't want to talk about it with anybody, but I knew that's where it stemmed from. But I didn't want to deal with her because I knew it was going to open up an old can of worms. So once we started talking about it and getting it out in the open to each other, I was realizing things that, the reason why she was doing certain things is because she hated my dad. He had cheated on her. Well, then she in return was cheating on him. So she opened up a whole thing of, you know, why she had did some of the things. And I was like, well, I thought you hated me. And she's like, no. She's like, yes, I said things to you that I should never have said to anybody, especially my own child. Um, and she was like, but they all stemmed from her past when her dad was physically abusive to her mom. And I didn't know that until then. So it was just a whole eye-opening experience, and I recommend anybody to just, if you need help, don't wait. Because usually when you wait, it's kind of too late at that point sometimes. And just rip the Band-Aid off. Sometimes you have to just rip the Band-Aid off in order to put the Neosporin on to clean it, to bandage it back up to heal. And I did not want to do that because
Yeah.
it hurts. It sucks. You don't want to do that. You don't want to relive the trauma that you closed the chapter on, and once her and I started talking, it was definitely a mind shift of she is not who she was. And the things that she did to me or to my brother or whatever, it was out of anger. It was when she had the intoxication, or it was when she wasn't herself. So once you have a foothold for Satan to get up in there to, get a hold of you, it's not necessarily the person that you're fighting. It's, the demonic spirit, or it's, whatever that the person has allowed to take over.
Well, just like you said in your situation, whenever you were almost lost it on your kid, you felt like you were seeing through her eyes whenever you said those things, like you were actually her. That's yeah. See, her dad. I mean, this is what happens. We deal with the demons of our ancestors. It gets passed down and passed down and passed down until somebody steps up and deals with it and says, no, it's not going to go to my kids. It's not going to go to my kids. And I'm a child of the king. I'm not going to allow it. Satan, flee. I've got Jesus in my heart. And, looking at you, I would have never known that. I would have never even considered, because you seem like a very confident person, you hold yourself pretty confidently, and you're good with your kids, and I mean, y'all, y'all just seem like a model family, at church. And, but you shared your testimony with the students there, and that really impressed me, because you being willing to open up that side of yourself. What I say tends to happen is we tend to close off those rooms in our mind, that we can't open those doors because there's the monsters in that door that we don't want, and it's best just to leave that shut and not worry about it. But what that ends up doing is the enemy uses that to keep us from allowing God to shine his light into that darkness. Uses fear and guilt and shame and anger and hurt and unforgiveness and all that,
Yeah.
to keep you from dealing with those things. And it takes a strong person to be what you've gone through, and be strong enough to share your testimony.
Yeah. I definitely sharing it with the teenagers, especially like the freshmen. That was when a lot of mine started to kind of taper off a little bit when I was, 15, 16. So if I could grab that freshman and be like, "Look, what you're feeling, I get. You go from the top of the, pyramid or top of the food chain in middle school, 8th grade to back to the bottom in freshman year of high school. Your hormones or, puberty, whatever, hormones are going crazy. And as a woman, I get that. Everybody goes through it. But, like, you don't have to go through that by yourself. I felt like I had to go through it by myself because I didn't want anyone knowing what was going on, and I felt it wasn't worth knowing, and that my story was gonna end right there, and that's fine, whatever. But I wanted to make sure that the high school students realize that, you're 16 to 18, you're becoming an adult. You have choices, and before you even become officially 18, adult, whatever, but you have a choice to make, and especially in your faith, those kids are way farther in their faith, a lot of them are than I was at the time, and I wanted them
Me
to
too.
truly understand that they can reach out to people, that if they have questions about their faith or if they have, because it's a different time now than it was, 10, 15 years ago when when I was growing up, and I want them to know the Lord, of course, but I want them to realize that, like, He's there, always has been. So when you feel like you can't talk to somebody, He is sitting right there, and that you don't have to, even if you're just talking out loud, like I was, I didn't feel like I was talking to God or anybody. I was just yelling, talking out loud. But those kids are so like what Pastor Christopher talks about, cracking their head open and just pouring in. I want those kids to understand that they're not alone and that what they're going through, and it could be the same as mine, it could be different, it could be just substance abuse or it could be sexual abuse or whatever. But man or woman, boy or girl, they're not alone, but they have an extended family that, at the church that they can go to and really just be like, look, I'm not going to give details. I just need help. You don't have to get there and go through A, B, C, D, classes or whatever, and then finally talk to somebody, or have an appointment to talk to a counselor or whatever. If they don't have that resource, okay, I get it. I've been there. But also, you don't need to hold it in. Just at least talk to somebody that you can trust to say, what do I do? Where do I go? I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do. And,
Yeah.
going back to scripture.
School coun school counselor or somebody. But then if they're scared if you talk to a school
Mhm.
counselor, then they have to get the authorities involved
Right. Right.
if it's like that, and they know if they get the authorities involved, they're gonna probably just end up back at home and their parents are gonna be pissed off.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
it's a fine line to know, who you can trust and who you can't. And where my situation was, is I felt like, well, everybody hates me. Everyone thinks I'm this way, even though it was a few people. I still felt like everyone was like that. So I might as well just keep my mouth shut and not say anything to anybody and just let it happen because, oh, well, it's bound to happen, or, no one's going to believe me. But if and just like my mother-in-law at the time, she was like, "I don't know what's going on, but you look different." To have that awareness and to pay attention to people, and it's just anybody like at Walmart or Hobby Lobby or wherever, you don't know what people are going through. So to acknowledge somebody to be like, "Hey,
the
look,
Holy
what'd you say?"
that was the Holy Spirit. That was the Holy Spirit at that moment while you have a knife in your hand, ready to end your own life, that you were that desperate, and for her to be able to speak into that situation, that's the Holy Spirit, man. Had to
And
be.
we can do that just simply to other people, just a simple, "Hey, how are you?" "Oh, I'm fine." Well, can I pray for you? I mean, you just something's just off. You don't have to go into detail, but can I just pray for you? A prayer can go so far. And I've learned that with my children. It's crazy that I say that because my oldest is a very spirit led, very like if something's off in his spirit, he's like, Mom, something's off. I got to talk to that person or something, just something doesn't sit right. I need to make sure they're okay. And so he's taught me a lot, and him and I are very similar on very vocal type people. So he'll a drop of a hat, someone in Walmart, he'll be like, "Hey, you good? Like you kind of look like you're struggling," and he'll sit there and pray with them, and it's just like a God thing that everything's just working out like that in my life. But it's so humbling to know that like, I need to be like that. God gave me that child for a reason when I shouldn't have had any at all. And so it's a learning experience for me to be like, okay, God gave me that
Yeah.
child. He is literally teaching me more. than I had in churches at the time that I was learning, in churches. He is just being the hands and feet of Jesus, childlike faith. And so just a simple
Yeah.
hug of somebody or, whether it's a stranger or someone that just to be like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. I'm just checking in. Like, are you okay? I've just kind of seen you post on Facebook or, and if you're scared to go up to random people, just acknowledging someone's existence, because that was huge for me that I felt like nobody cared even if I was there. So to have someone acknowledge, like, hey, how are you? Well, good morning. How are you? I work at a surgeon's office. And so seeing patients come in all the time hurting, I'm try to be very adamant on, well, good morning or good afternoon, how are you doing? I know you're here, so you obviously aren't doing too well, but, trying to small talk with people to maybe get them to open up a little bit and to kind of have that softer heart that I was so hardened for so many years to like soften it a little bit. And
Yeah.
that's been a whole pruning thing from God as well, of just softening my heart to truly just be an open vessel, for him to use for other people. And there needs to be more people out there that are just willing to sit and listen and give them the opportunity to share their story on their time. But yeah, it's been
Well,
pruning.
as you allow him to shine his light into those dark places inside of you, then more of his light is starting to shine through you. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And that's pretty amazing how that works. This world is dark. This world is very dark. And it's up to us as the church, as the children of God, the Christians, to allow God to shine his light into that dark world. And we're failing miserably. Thank you for being willing to come on here and allow your light to shine and try to help other people. You never know what people are going through. Today, everything's so fake. It's so easy just to be fake. You can be a completely different person than what you really are.
Like we have to prove something to, people. And that was another thing that I did for a long time, like on social media. I was posting a picture smiling, all the things when I'm struggling in my marriage or when and it's like, we're not perfect. Well, I don't know why we have to act like we are. Deep down, we know everybody's struggling with something. And just to have that facade kind of broken and that taboo, whatever about, struggling. Everyone's fine. No one wants to talk about struggles or anything. That's like, well, I mean, we're all gonna go through something, we all can relate in some way or another to people, and that's creating disciples. That is connecting with people that we're, called to by God to connect with people and to share your testimony and to be able to help others and create disciples because you don't know that one testimony or that one part of your testimony that someone that they can grab a hold to it just life-saving. You never know. And I've heard from people that have helped me in my walk as a mom, like other moms at the church or you know other wives that I've talked to on just giving me tips and tricks on how to be a better wife that I should have known but I didn't, the way that I grew up. And it's just little things like that have blessed me more than I could ever say, to know that, "Well, you've gone through it too? Oh my gosh, where have you been? Like, sit down and talk with me and give me notes that I can, use to glorify God because apparently I'm not doing it right." Just to have conversation with people. And, it's a lot in this world is everyone has to agree. And if you don't, you're outcast, you're different, something's wrong with you. And that's not true. We're called to be different and not of this world. So different in that aspect, yes. But we're not different in a negative way that we, can't just have a normal conversation and it doesn't have to be a debate. It doesn't have to be, well, you have to agree with me or I can't talk to you. No, I mean, we're all different walks of life, different cultures, skin colors, religion, anything. So it's been very good to talk to people about their stories and to really get to know them as a person and kind of see why they are the way that they are and where they're going and how I can help and how they can help me. And that's where you get that discipleship into you know, what God's called us to do. And it's beautiful. It's hard sometimes, when you hear people's stories and you're like, "Oh, I cannot believe," like you said, I never would have thought. And it's not that I try to put on a facade or a face now, but it's a little bit easier to start. It's a little easier to kind of say my testimony out loud because it's on the end of a healing journey, but just to see the people that have been through the same thing that are just now being okay to open up and willing to talk about it. It breaks my heart, but it's such a blessing because it's releasing and healing for them. But it also is humbling for me to just be able to sit with people and, just to be quiet and still for a minute and allow them to heal out loud. Because sometimes we think of healing is from the inside out, and a lot of times it's, they have to get it out in order for them to hear. I've gone through that. That's not
Yeah.
okay. This is not something God's done to me, because of XYZ or whatever. This is something that I either, bad consequences or, Satan's creeped into somebody else to attack me or whatever. But it's sad to hear some stories, but at the same time, it always ends up in happy tears of just knowing that we're all human. Don't put people on pedestals because you never know what they're going through, and that God is good. He always is, whether you see it at that time or not, he always is, and he's a just God. So there were things that with me and my mom that, he had to put in order to where, we didn't speak for a couple years, and she didn't get to see my kids when they were itty bitty babies. And he's a just God. He cracks down on things that need to be dealt with. But also, in us as believers, it's to just have more softer hearts for him to move through, because you can't move through a hard vessel. You have to be soft and moldable. Being that light, light can shine through your cracks. My husband's talked before about, having cracks in your vessel. And yeah, God's molding and moving us, but the only way for him to really shine through is if we allow the cracks for him to just kind of work through that. And it's beautiful. It's a crazy ride, but it's something that I'm glad I'm able to share and to talk about out loud, because it needs to be talked about, it needs to be shared, and it is a part of my story, and anybody that gets to know me will end up knowing my story. And it's just you don't realize what people are going through, and it's a way of God's kinda orchestrating discipleship, and just, it's what we're called to do. I don't
Amen.
We shouldn't hide from it.
Yeah. I believe just like your son is teaching you things, you're teaching your mom how to be a mom.
True. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Once again, thank you so much for being willing to share your testimony,
Yeah.
and I believe it's gonna really help some people. Man, you never know what's going on behind closed doors in
Mhm.
houses.
Yeah.
And is there any last statement you would like to make?
Just keep going back to the paralyzed man and the mat. I know I've said that before, but it just, don't ever forget where you came from. You don't have to write that off. Like you don't have to feel like God's not going to use that. A book doesn't have chapters missing. Like there's chapters in there for a reason. You go alphabetical order, you go 1 through 10, whatever, he's not going to take out chapters that are not necessary. The reason why the Bible was created was every chapter had a purpose, and I feel like that's how we are as believers, is we're all different chapters in one big book. And just to not forget where you came from, to have that still be glorified for the Lord, and to allow yourself really just to be present with people, kind of be aware of people and kind of struggles, especially during the holidays. I know it's kind of tough on a lot of people. Just don't forget, where you came from, and to know that you're not by yourself. There is people out there that have been there, some worse, some not as bad, and that God is literally just a voice away. You can just say, "Look, God, talk to me because I don't know what to do." It doesn't have to be a thou with the Lord, all the things that, people make it out to be, that it's just you can just sit and not say anything and just hear from the Lord, and just know that he's someone that's gonna be there 24/7, 7 days a week, all the things, and that you don't have to write off your past because it was written for a reason.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, that Pastor Chris says that our our purpose, God given purpose, will be found in our deepest pain. Thank you again. Let's pray.
Yes.
Father God, we love you. We thank you for your goodness, your grace, and your mercy. We thank you for being with us today during during Ashley sharing her testimony. God, I ask that you just bless it, God, that you reach those who need to be reached with her testimony, Father. Bless her and her family, God. I ask that you just mend relation, help to mend relationships in her life, God. I ask that you bless her family, bless them spiritually, physically, and financially, Lord. Bless her for her willingness to share her testimony, Father. show up in her life in tremendous ways that she can't explain any other way than you. We love you, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.